Today's ships, by using the canal, cut 5,000 miles off their journey from Europe to the east. The Stratheden, the ship that we saw leaving England, has arrived at Port Said, Egypt, the Mediterranean gateway to the canal. Here she will wait her turn to go through the Suez Canal. Port Said has become world famous as a port of call. Built on sand dredged from the canal when it was first cut, this city has grown due to the tremendous world trade stimulated by the seaway. Besides the Stratheden, there are other ships anchored in the harbor waiting to make the southbound passage to the Red Sea. They have to wait because over most of its length, ships going in opposite directions cannot safely pass in the canal. So a number of ships going in the same direction must wait until the waterway is clear. Once the canal is clear, these ships will enter it in convoy. A pilot must be taken aboard each ship to supervise its passage through the canal. Every one of these pilots employed by the Egyptian government has a detailed knowledge of the channels, depths of water, and the systems of buoys used to guide ships on the right course through the canal. This pilot is going aboard an oil tanker. Tankers carry vast quantities of oil through the Suez Canal. In fact, about 60% of all ships piloted through the canal are oil tankers. While the pilot is on board any ship, he is in command as far as navigation is concerned. Another pilot is on his way to the Stratheden. The Stratheden and other ships at Port Said weigh anchor during the evening and move into the canal. By now, 31 ships have assembled to make the southbound passage. All ships that pass through must pay canal dues. These dues are based on the sizes of the ships and the weight of the cargoes they carry. The first part of the canal journey is made at night, from Port Said southward past Lake Timsah to the Great Bitter Lake. Dawn on the Great Bitter Lake finds the Stratheden at anchor. Behind her come the other ships in the southbound convoy, which will also drop anchor here. The Great Bitter Lake is one of the few places where ships moving in opposite directions may safely pass one another. This is the last ship of the southbound convoy approaching the lake. Meanwhile, northbound ships are moving toward the Great Bitter Lake. From the banks of the canal, they appear to be traveling over the desert sand. Now the entire convoy, led by the Stratheden, is at anchor. While waiting for the northbound convoy to the Mediterranean to pass them, the Stratheden passengers relax in the warm, sunny climate of North Africa. There's not long to wait before the first ship of the northbound convoy, a tanker bringing oil from the Persian Gulf to Europe, steams past. Another tanker. More than 100 million tons of oil are carried in an average year through the canal. Within a few hours, the ships of this convoy, bound northward for the Mediterranean, have left the lake and are entering the northern section of the canal. Now the Stratheden resumes her southward journey with the Suez Canal pilot in charge on the bridge. Moving out of the Great Bitter Lake, the liner passes one of the signaling stations located at various points along the length of the canal, which check the progress of ships. Moving through the channel marked by buoys, the convoy follows the Stratheden and passes into the southern section of the canal. This section links the Great Bitter Lake with the Red Sea. Behind us is a tanker. Nearly 20,000 ships use the canal every year, carrying every imaginable type of cargo between Europe and Asia. No wonder the Suez Canal is one of the world's busiest trade routes. To keep this trade route open, dredges deepen the canal bed, and workers continuously repair the canal banks. Maintenance goes on not only along the banks, but underwater along the docks.
Paratroops dropping on the Suez Canal in 1956 put the United Nations and the Secretary General to the test. British and French forces had intervened in the Israeli-Egyptian war, hoping to keep the canal open. Mankind teetered precariously on the brink of a third world war. Would the United Nations in this time of grave crisis be equal to the challenge? The world watched and waited and wondered. Before the Security Council came representatives of all the nations involved to present their differences. Finally, with American backing, the United Nations voted to establish an international police force to try and end the fighting. Secretary General Hammarskjöld traveled to Israel to personally present the UN's plea for a ceasefire. After meeting with Premier Ben-Gurion, Hammarskjöld announced that Israel had agreed to withdraw its troops from Egyptian territory when the international force took over. As the UN jeeps rolled ashore, the British and French also left. Once again, the world had been spared an all-out nuclear war.
Arab-Israeli conflict persists. Air and artillery clashes along the Suez Canal were frequent, each side announcing widely divergent claims of extensive damage. Here an Israeli attack sets fire to Egyptian oil tanks, and Israelis show a downed Egyptian MiG. Israel seemed to have the advantage in this type of fighting. But the Arab nations shifted tactics and began a campaign of concentrated guerrilla warfare. The Palestinian guerrillas became the heroes of the Arab world. Most of the Arab regimes contributed funds, and training camps were set up for the volunteers who flocked to the cause. For a time, Lebanon refused to allow the Palestinians freedom to launch their attacks from Lebanese territory. But the guerrillas seized parts of Lebanese cities, including Tripoli, and Lebanon finally acceded to most of the guerrilla demands. The guerrillas made occasional commando raids into Israeli territory, but were more often involved in bombings and rocketings of Israeli facilities like this market. Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser reinforced the guerrilla actions when he said the only solution to the Mideast troubles was more blood. Nevertheless, first the Big Four, and then the U.S. and Russia searched for a negotiated settlement. At year's end, the U.S. moved closer to
in the Sinai as Israeli forces pulled back. The Egyptians gained control of Sinai oil fields and reopened the Suez Canal.